I am Mary. I was there. It was an unbelievable journey. The absolute best of journeys and the absolute worst of journeys. I grew up in the small town of Magdalene, about 100 miles from Jerusalem. I didn't get to Jerusalem very often as a kid. Perhaps we went once or twice with my father when he went on pilgrimage. And to get there, we had to either walk or go in a cart pulled by oxen, and that was very dusty and very smelly. My father was a fisherman, and a good one too. So I grew up in a house, a home, with a roof and walls and a clean dirt floor with rushes and rugs on the floor. And my mother looked after the housekeeping and looking after the children and cooking and sewing and doing the gardening and feeding the animals. And I have 3 sisters and a brother, and I'm the oldest. I was probably the most difficult, as there was something wrong with me. I didn't know what it was, but at times I was told I would fall on the ground and thrash around and moan and groan and foam at the mouth, and then it would go away. I remembered nothing of what happened. But when I woke up, there would be a group of neighbors standing around, shaking their heads and speaking words of demons and possession and evil. And I also knew something had happened when I woke up, because my hair was all messy and my hair ribbons were gone and I was dirty and my knees were scratched and I was so very tired. And if it happened in the house, I would wake up and I would find out that, the rushes and the rugs were all scattered about and perhaps a table was overturned. I know my parents were worried about me. They had the priest in to pray for me, but that didn't help. And I know my father gave them a lot of money. So I didn't have many friends. The neighbors thought that perhaps I might taint their precious children. Perhaps I might be contagious. There was no chance of anyone wanting to marry me, as nobody would want that burden. But life wasn't so bad. My father tried to make my life better. He paid more attention to me than he did to the other children. He taught me how to read and to write and to count. I think he felt guilty. And he would take me to the docks when the fishermen were bringing in his fish. And that was so exciting being there, because there was lots of yelling and singing. And then we'd go to the markets to sell the fish. And that was really incredible, because there were so many different things happening there. So many different kinds of cloth and the colors were all bright and shiny. And people with different colored skins. Some had black skins, some had sort of yellow skins, and they wore wild clothes. And there was preaching and singing and dancing. Sometimes when Father was busy, I would listen to the preachers. And I heard the name, Jesus of Nazareth. But I didn't know what that meant, and I asked my father, and he smiled at me and patted me on the head and said, "You don't have to worry your pretty little head about that." So I didn't. Mother would have preferred I stay at home and learn to cook and clean and sew and look after the children, but I knew that wasn't in my future, so I started to think about looking after myself. The only time I had troubles was when one of those times would come upon me and I'd fall to the ground. And my father always picked me up and dusted me off, but I knew that he was embarrassed because he generally hastened me away from the scene. These days, I traveled often to Jerusalem on pilgrimage and business. My father let me take care of some of the business while he was in the synagogue. And I got to go to the markets by myself and sell Father's fish and trade for cloth and other things that the family needed. One day, as we were journeying home, we saw a huge group of people lined up by the side of the road. There were men and women and children gathered together, and they were gathered around a smaller group of men, and one of those men was talking. And then it happened again. The next thing I remember, there was a cool hand on my forehead and a soft, gentle voice saying, "Get up, woman." And a hand under my arm helping me up. And when I was standing, he said, "Go in peace. You are saved from your demons. God bless." And he walked away, and the crowd closed behind him, oohing and awing about what had happened. My father tried to hurry me back to the cart, but I didn't want to go. I wanted to see this man again. I wanted to listen to his voice and to stand by his side and even to kneel at his feet if I had to. Everything had changed. Back home, I set out to find out about this man, and I learned his name was Jesus, the name I'd heard in the markets before. And I learned from the priests that this man, Jesus, was a troublemaker, that he was saying that men and women and children were equal in the sight of God, and that God loved everybody. And that was very strange to me. And I heard that Jesus had bad friends. He liked Samaritans and tax collectors, and I was told he talked to women that he didn't know, and he worked on the Sabbath. The people called him Messiah, King of the Jews, and that he was going to come and destroy the Romans, and that we would be free. I only knew that I wanted to see him again. I begged and I begged. One day I got down on my knees in front of my father. "Father, please let me go to him. He cured me. I want to be with him. I know you know that I've never asked for anything before, but I'm asking this now to you on my knees. Please let me go." And there must have been something in my voice that morning, because my father's face softened, and he looked at me and he said, "Okay, girl, you can go." And he gave me some money and a hug, and he went back in the house. It didn't take me long to find him. People were talking of Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. And I joined the crowds and I followed. And in the beginning, I could only help with finding food and lodging for Jesus and the disciples. And there were other women following too. You should have seen him. He was unbelievable, so kind and so gentle. And he had long fingers that came alive when he touched people to heal them. And his eyes were deep. You know, I can't even remember the color, just that they were deep, so deep that I could drown in them. And he didn't seem to walk, he seemed to glide above the ground. And people were drawn to him like a magnet. He had a special energy. And he talked of love for God and for each other and for our enemies. He loved everyone, and I loved him. I wanted to touch him, to run my fingers through his hair, to hold him, to comfort him. But it was difficult, so very difficult, because he loved everyone. I was just one of thousands. I wanted him for myself, but I couldn't have him. I didn't have much time with him. He talked about having to leave us, and we couldn't imagine life without him. One day Jesus said we were going into Jerusalem, and the disciples didn't think it was a good idea at all. But that Jesus, that man, he had the strangest ideas. He rode into Jerusalem on a donkey. He should have gone in a chariot. So many horrible things happened in that city. And one day, I don't know what made him do this. We were in the temple, and all of a sudden, Jesus just had a fit. He turned the tables over, he set the doves free, he called the priests' names, he blamed them for all of the deaths of the prophets, and he blamed them for all the blood ever spilled. I just stood there, and all of a sudden, Jesus quit. He stopped, and he paused, and he turned and he walked away. Later that evening, he warned us about the people who would try to turn his message into a circus. And he called on us not to give up, to do everything we could, no matter what stood in our way. That evening, we had supper together. Once again, he did some weird things. He took the bread, and he broke it, and he said, "Take this and eat this. This is my body. Do this to remember me." And then he took a jug of wine, and he poured a cup, and he held it up, and he said, "Take this and drink it. This is my blood. Do this in remembrance of me." We tried to understand. He talked about being raised up and the coming of the kingdom, and we listened. We tried to understand, but it was confusing, and we were so tired. The Romans seized Jesus and took him before Caiaphas, the chief priest, and then before Pontius Pilate, the governor, and then Herod, who had him flogged and who gave him to the crowd to crucify. Mother Mary and I followed what happened as best we could. We were pushed down and stepped on by the crowds as we tried to keep up. They hurt him, put a crown of thorns on his head, a crown of thorns on his head, and pushed it down, and the blood dribbled down his face. And they made him carry a heavy cross to the top of the hill of Gethsemane. And they set it up. They nailed him to it, and they set it up. Mother Mary and I were in shock. How could they do this to him? We hung in each other's arms, crying and wiping away the tears trying our best to keep up, ducking under elbows and by people until we were at the foot of the cross. He hung there for hours. I was so angry with him. I had seen him do miracles. Why didn't he do one now? Why didn't he become a whirlwind and destroy the Romans and the priests and the people who had called for crucifixion? He could have done it. I know he could have, but he didn't. He did nothing. And just before he died, I heard him say, "Father, forgive them. They know not what they're doing." And then he died. A huge emptiness filled me. I felt nothing. Nothing. It was like I had died with him. Nothing mattered. Finally, they took his body down and they gave it to Joseph of Arimathea, who took it and put it in a cave and rolled a big stone in front of the door, in front of the opening. And Mary and I went to get the spices for purification. But when we got back, the stone was rolled away. It was gone. We crept quietly into the dark cave, and when we could see again, we saw that the tomb was empty. There was nothing there. But suddenly, a dazzling white light filled the cave, and a voice told us what Jesus had said would happen had happened. Jesus had risen. Oh my Lord, Jesus has risen. We tripped over each other as we ran to find the disciples. Jesus isn't dead. He isn't dead. He's risen. But the disciples didn't believe us until Jesus appeared to some of them, and then he appeared to me. He was beautiful as always. There had always been a glow about him, but now he was shining. And it took a step towards him, but he stepped away. And his face got serious. And he said that I had a mission to fulfill. I was to go to the disciples and to give them instructions for how to carry God's word to the world, his message. And he told me what I was to do, and he told me what I was to say. And then he smiled, a sad and lonely smile, and once again, it was gone. I tried. I really tried. But the disciples couldn't or wouldn't accept that Jesus had given me, a woman, his instructions. Peter had been the leader before, and jealousy and distrust and infighting began just as Jesus had said it would. I can only say now that I am truly blessed to have been part of Jesus' life and legacy in bringing Christianity to the world. I have two reasons why Mary Magdalene intrigues me. She intrigues me. Firstly, she's a woman. And secondly, she had a mission. She's not so different from any of the women sitting in this church today. And she's not much different than myself. She had a father who went out to work to bring in money to feed and clothe his family, just like my father did. She had a mother who cooked and cleaned and sewed and looked after the kids, and probably her husband as well, just like my mother did. I am absolutely certain that her parents had dreams about a better life for her, just as my folks did. Her church was an emerging church. It was just becoming influential, and the rules for that church hadn't been written yet. We at St. Paul's, we are an emerging church as well, and we are becoming influential by changing some of those rules. Mary lived in a man's world. I don't think my world is quite as male-dominant as Mary's was, but I still think that we women have to fight for equality. And Mary was a woman in love, with all the problems that love brings. I've loved two men in my life, Tom and Gary. Mary wanted to have Jesus to herself, but she couldn't. I know how she felt. I know how I felt when Tom and I would go dancing, and he would dance with far more women in the room than I thought was necessary. At the beginning of Lent, we were given a list of questions to ponder. And the last question really made me think. It was, why were you given this day? Wow. Why am I given this day? It must mean that I too have a mission, that I too have a purpose. But what is it? Is what I do enough? I go to the gym in the mornings 4 or 5 times a week. I look after myself. I volunteer at a local high school, teaching immigrant children how to improve their English skills. That must count for something. I go to 3 or 4 meetings a week of a spiritual nature where I help myself and I help others. Mary's mission was one of comforting and supporting Jesus, and she practiced radical hospitality as well. But Mary told his story. She communicated her faith. I need to learn how to communicate my faith with my children, my grandchildren, this faith community, my neighbors, my friends, my community. I am looking for more ways to serve. I want to continue the work begun by Jesus. I want to learn deeper compassion and deeper understanding, deeper acceptance. I want to challenge the inequities and the prejudices in this world. I want to study Jesus' words to live the way he lived, loving God, loving others. That is my mission. I want to make a difference.